Thanks everybody so much for joining us today. I'm Paula French from Search Influence. We are a digital marketing agency focused on search engine optimization and paid digital advertising. And we're proud to be an UPCEA Platinum partner. And we're joined today by Jim and Bruce from UPCEA's Center for Research and Strategy. Thank y'all very much for joining us. I've also got Allison Zarang here from Search Influence, and we're going to do some official introductions in just a moment. But today we're going to be going into the details behind a study that we just launched with UPCEA last week to establish benchmarks for both cost per inquiry and cost per enrollment for professional, continuing, and online education. Today's webinar is going to be a combination of both informational overall about these key metrics, as well as providing some helpful resources to enable you to better respond to the survey that's currently in progress. All right, let's do some quick intro of our panelists. So as the Director of Sales and Marketing at Search Influence, I help lay the foundation for productive partnerships between our agency and our new clients. I've spent more than half of my career working directly with our clients, actually planning and executing and optimizing digital marketing strategies for the services that I mentioned before, primarily SEO and paid digital ads, as well as email marketing and all of those other great things in order to drive people through your funnel. But today I'm really focused on connecting with new institutions that we can help grow. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jim for him to introduce himself.
Hey, thank you, Paula, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this. I'm Jim Fong. I'm the Chief Research Officer at UPCEA, and my role here is to help look for and identify trends. I work with a consulting group at UPCEA, and I work with Bruce Eder in terms of the market research side of things. I've been with UPCEA now for probably around 12 or 13 years. Prior to that, I was at Penn State University and Director of Marketing Research and Planning there, and I spent about 2 or 3 years in between that. Staying within the higher education sector, but consulting, and realized that UPCEA was my happy place. It was the place that I needed to be at, and so really happy to be part of this, because I really feel like a lot of marketing things that we take for granted, even email and SEO, it's been around for a while, but we really need to be paying attention to it more and more, and we kind of underestimated what it can do and gotten a little bit lazy about things. And so I think what I hope to do today is really kind of help set the stage for how important it is. So let me hand the baton off to Bruce to kind of explain what he does at UPCEA.
Thank you, Jim. Hello, everyone. My name is Bruce Eder. I am the Senior Director of Research and Consulting at UPCEA. I'm the project manager, if you will, of any research effort that comes through our doors, whether that be individual research for some of our members, but also some of our larger benchmarking initiatives like the one that we're talking about today. So that's my role in a nutshell. Happy to talk about it a lot more if anyone's interested. But with that, I'll pass it over to Allison.
Hey everyone, thanks Bruce. My name is Allison Zarang, and I'm the Director of Account Management at Search Influence. So I work alongside Paula, working really closely with a lot of our clients on strategy for all the digital advertising and marketing things that you can imagine. But in particular, in the last 6 or so years, I've had a bit of a focus with our higher education clients, working really closely with them to execute strategies that are effective for fueling their pipelines.
So to get into our agenda, first up, Jim is going to set the stage with some points about the higher education landscape, and Bruce is going to share some data from the 2022 UPCEA marketing study and really how this leads into the importance of this new cost per study that we're doing right now. Then Allison and I are going to speak to the significance of cost per inquiry and share a client example that really illustrates how cost per inquiry has helped us improve our marketing campaigns and how it can help you improve yours. Then I'm going to go into discussing 2 key challenges specifically of CPI as a benchmark that we're ultimately looking to solve for you through this study, and give you some tips on how to find your CPI data. And then to wrap it up, Bruce is going to conduct our Q&A. So get your, think about your questions as we're going through. You can submit them into the chat. And then after Q&A, we're going to select one lucky attendee to win a digital door prize, if you will. So just by being here today and staying through Q&A, you have a chance to win a $200 gift card, as well as a professional CPI analysis from our team here at Search Influence. And with that, I'm going to kick it off to Bruce. Jim. I'm looking at you, Jim, and I'm saying Bruce. Y'all are not one and the same in my head, I promise. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Paula. So I get the privilege of kind of setting the stage with the higher education landscape. And for those of you that are from the UPCEA community, I apologize for the repeat because I've probably been saying a lot of the similar things for the last 2 years, but they're very relevant, and I'll provide some updates and insights as I see them. So it's really my goal to kind of look at this and provide some interpretation and modernize my interpretation. So the next slide really kind of shows basically the enrollment trends that we're facing in higher education. And we've got the demographic cliff, and everybody's panicking. College administrators are panicking. Presidents are panicking, and as a result, we have got to rethink education. What this is showing here is that we've been seeing a slow but steady decline over the last 10 years. Since 2010, when we had 18.1 million undergraduate students and 2.9 graduate students. Higher education really works well on 20 million students, at least the current form of it, where it's basically a model where, okay, it was very connected to the economy. It was very much hooked into the internet and the cloud-based generation, but it needed 20 million students to operate well. As that market matured, the demographics weren't very favorable as well. And we know about the demographic cliff. We can see that we're losing about 1 million or less students every year, all the way up to 2022. And that's a function. The reality here is that higher education really should not have been losing those enrollments, because at the same rate, high school graduates were either increasing, or the percentage increasing was graduating, or the numbers were remaining relatively flat. So we're seeing a decline. And furthermore, in this decline here is that if we didn't have online education, those numbers would be pretty bad. And they would be kind of panicky bad. So online during this past decade plus has really kind of helped soften the urgency of higher education needing to transform itself. But now we're at the point right now where we can only do so much. And there's even talk about, has the online education numbers, are they going to be stagnant from here on in? Are they going to be flat? Is there room for any more growth or not? There's a lot of that being debated. But regardless, we're at 15.1 million undergraduates, down from 18.1. That's 3 million students less than where we were in 2010. And the forecast is really that graduate programs, and this is a report I saw from Encora about a year ago, Encora EduVentures, that shows that graduate enrollments are likely to be flat moving forward, or even decline a little bit. So these are not the most positive numbers that we have out there. But to be honest with you, there's hope. But this is a decline in traditional education. If we choose to educate different audiences, we can, I'm going to be optimistic. I'm not going to be so gloom and doom, that we can actually transform education, but we have to have a willingness to do this. We have to let go a little bit of the past. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting slide here. This is a change of enrollment since the pandemic. That first block of results there are what Southern New Hampshire was seeing for their enrollments mid-pandemic and then post-pandemic. The same thing holds Western Governors as well. They picked up a lot more students as well during after the pandemic. If you look at IPED's data from Maryland Global, you'll see the same thing. There's an article within Inside Higher Education that says after the pandemic, these 3 institutions picked up over 10,000 18 to 22-year-olds. So a lot has happened during the pandemic, and a lot will continue to happen as we evolve into this new economy. But there's going to be massive shifts, and we can't hold on to just the degree-only model. Next slide, please. So here's where I'm optimistic here. we panic in terms of college and university enrollments because it's really about 15.1 million students, because those graduate students haven't really changed, and we're drawing from them in other audiences as well. But we're panicking because we might go from 15.1 to 14.5 to, there's even folks that predict that will traditional degree-based education go down into the 13s for the 18, 22-year-old students. That possibility exists, but I don't think it will happen. I'm hopeful that it won't happen. If we continue to be resistant in higher education, then there's a chance that it will go down. But I think higher education will adapt. They're a little slow, but they will adapt. And I think these audiences that they will adapt to is a some college no degree market there. That's the next kind of market for higher education. These people have got 45 plus credits. They've left college for a particular reason, and a lot of them are still carrying loans as well. Why not serve them? Because they believe in colleges for the most part, college and universities. But then there's another 200 million folks in the marketplace. Those with a degree, those with high school degree or GED, or with no high school degree. There's other ways that colleges and universities can serve this marketplace. It's just that we got to get away from this 120 credit model. We've got to look at other models for education. Next slide, please. So one of the things that has been apparent to me, and it might have been cut off here, but this is a study that we did with Modern Campus and Evolution here, and we surveyed the UPCEA community and others in the Modern Campus community as well. And we asked the question here: is my PCO unit, Professional Continuing Online unit, has the support and buy-in from senior leadership to scale and expand PCO courses and programs? 26% said they strongly agree. 45% said they agree. There's another research study that we've done, and whether or not our UPCEA membership, whether or not their institutions have seen Professional Continuing Online built into their strategic plans, and we're seeing increasing numbers there. We're also seeing research that Bruce just did regarding a grant where we ask questions about whether or not micro-credentials is in a strategic plan. We're seeing more and more of this. So where I've rinsed and repeated a lot of this old data, I'm here to tell you that we're getting more traction, I believe, based on what I'm seeing and reading regarding activity in the micro-credential stackability sides of education here. And I think we're seeing more support from our leadership as well. One of the things that I'm hearing more about here is that faculty are still questioning what we're doing. And there's some faculty are still questioning whether online is still viable or not, or whether that's still good. Now they're questioning micro-credentials here, but at least we're having that discussion. And I think those are positive developments here, that these are not new things for them. Next slide, please. So the model that we're really trying to promote now is, or encourage people to work on is, and Bruce and I had this discussion with a client the other day, at one of our member institutions, about promoting a specific program. And we basically told this institution that it's more than just the program. It's actually what can you stack things in so they get the degree that should another pandemic happen, that they're not going to be left holding the bag with 9 credits and not a certificate toward a 30 credit master's degree, or can they get 60 credits or 70 credits in on an undergraduate degree and get something that's stackable so they get an associate's degree or a certificate of some competency, or digital badges along the way. We think that you've got to start looking at things beyond just that master's degree in data analytics or that master's degree in social work. You've got to look at the entire pipeline. So that's where we think as we move forward here that we'll have greater impact as a community. Next slide, please. So the other leg of the stool that is really starting to show itself now is that, back during the pandemic and a little bit post-pandemic, Bruce and I were doing a lot of work on the new adult learner. Who is this new adult learner? What are their beliefs? What are their needs? What do they want? How do they shop? How do they behave? We did so much research on that. But we also surveyed our own membership. We looked at our colleges and universities ready for it. The third leg of the stool was employers. And we spent the last probably 2 years really studying the employer market. And the employer market is really looking at higher education as a solution in all this. that colleges and universities have a brand name, they have experience, they have access to different resources, different technologies, and so they want to partner with colleges and universities. However, there's a lot of things that get in the way. We've got to work on our relationships. We've got to look at the product. 120 credits is something that they want potentially in the long run, but they want stackability along the way. They want to use education as an employee retention tool in addition to an employee training tool as well. And so this is a study that we did recently with collegians that shows 24% said that they would greatly increase their interest in working with colleges and universities if they had more stackable programs and products there. 56% would increase their interest. And this also follows another study that we did not too long ago with Wiley as well. Wiley did a study and it showed a lot of interest from the employer community as well. So there's a lot of things that are very positive in terms of this stackable micro-credential kind of mentality, but it really requires us to move our products, our marketing, our communication, and the way we do business into a new way of thinking. Next slide, please. So what we actually have here is this is a summary of you can Google search this, or you can search off the UPCEA site for a lot of this here, is that the adult learner is very complicated. And one of the things that we've done with Search Influence here is that we've looked at a number of our member websites, and not only are they difficult for employers to work with, they're very, very difficult for the adult learner to navigate. I take great pride in anytime we work with a member through UPCEA's research and consulting here. I spend a lot of time looking at their websites, and I really find a lot of problems with them. And I look at a university, and then the way they design their web architecture tends to be around one adult learner. But what we've learned through UPCEA research and Bruce's work here is that there's at least six major segments that we've defined here. There's Valentina and Amir, who represent the Generation Z, or young millennials, or zillennials is the other term that they could be as well. Elise and Michael represent kind of the mature millennial and have certain goals here. And then we have Jennifer and David, who are older millennials or Gen Xers that have more work experience, but also they may also carry more college credit. But the way they look at colleges and universities is very different. Their income levels are very, very different. We know that Gen Z kind of struggles right now for a number of reasons financially, and they're very cost sensitive as a result. I also look at that as not only do they have less disposable income than millennials and Gen Xers before them, they also have they're also smarter with their money. And we don't give Gen Zers enough credit in terms of how they are as consumers. I think they're more cost sensitive is because they're better with money. They look at their phones, they comparative shop right, in real time, and they can compare things almost immediately. They understand value. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer. I'm 58 years old. I admit that, but I didn't have access to information to comparative shop, and I also did not shop interest rates on credit cards or mortgages with a lot of aggression. Gen Zers, they do that in real time. They'll buy a can of soda and they'll look at, hey, right around they don't buy soda, by the way, they buy water and vitamin water, but or coconut water or whatever, and they look, hey, I could get it for 12 cents cheaper right around the corner, and they will do that just because they understand value better. They're better consumers and they're savvy consumers. They look at ingredients that go not only in their food and in their financial statements online, but they also in higher education. They look at what is built in higher education, what they can get along the way. Can they get a certificate? Can they get a micro-credential? Can they get a digital badge? Do they really have to take this course? They are very, very savvy and thus very cost sensitive. And so I think a lot of that plays into the equation about stackability as well. And I think that's what this slide says, is that we've got to look at the adult learner very, very differently. And while there are many different adult learners, let's at least focus in on more than one. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we also have here is this slide was done in 2021, and what we find out here is Gen Zers, they use media differently. Very different from millennials and Gen Xers. And in fact, some of the research I showed shows that some of in fact, something I just saw last month was that the audience that hasn't left Twitter, or X now, and I don't really like the name X, to be honest. It feels oppressive, just to let you know. But the audience that is staying with X tends to be millennial males, which is kind of interesting there. But the migration of young females to TikTok has been astronomical. But the migration to TikTok in general has been astronomical. Regardless if a state has closed down access to that. I was in Indiana about 3 weeks ago, and I was surprised that I could not access TikTok through the wireless that I logged into for the university because they banned it. But I was just shocked at that. But that's not the only state that's done that. I think it's really kind of silly, to be honest with you, because that's their target market, and they've cut off access to it. So what you see in front of you is the importance of digital marketing to these 6 segments here. One of the things that pops out here, in addition to social and digital media, is university website. And I think this is where we've got sloppy as a community. University website by far is the most trusted source. It may not be the most exciting source, but it's the most trusted source. And what I've actually feel is within the higher education community here, we have webmasters, we have designers that have over-designed and done things their way, but not looked at the SEO side of it. So we go to the next slide and we can see the results of this. What we actually have here is 84% of marketing departments see SEO as core of their marketing strategy, but do not have an established SEO strategy, or I think they fall short. So, I think they believe in SEO, but are they really executing on it? And if you could hit the button next. What we're actually seeing here, and this is a surprising thing, I was part of the early SEO adoption at Penn State University, 20 plus years ago. I said, we got to do SEO, we got to do all sorts of stuff. And I've stayed up with it over the decades now. This is kind of embarrassing to say, but I hate to use the word decades here, but what I really, in working with search influence over the last 2.5 years, I've kind of realized that the more, and I've looked at this, Bruce and I had another meeting with a new member institution, to UPCEA, and we saw their SEO was a mess. And it was, their title tags wrong, their meta language was wrong, and it was, but their designers were holding them hostage. And this is something where yes, that's just one institution, but Bruce and Paul have done a lot of research through the UPCEA community. And what we have actually found out here is that not only are the basic SEO technical components off, the navigation's off, the link strengths are off. A lot of things are just not being done right. And it's kind of like email. You think that you can write, anybody can write an email, but there's an art and a science of writing an email. There's also an art and a science of designing a website. And I think that the UPCEA community has kind of stopped, shining the nice bright light on it and kind of let it do its own thing here. And as a result, we are not doing a good job. And I think that we've got to do a better job because, as I said earlier, the market is shrinking for traditional education. We've got to reach new audiences. We've got to get our websites performing at the highest levels if we want to convert at the highest levels and offset this demographic cliff. So this is something that we did 100 member institutions. We interviewed marketing leaders. We interviewed deans and directors and whatsoever. And when we actually did our audit here, we're getting a failing grade. And this isn't so just to make it look bad, so you go off to search influence. This is really all about our performance, and I care about our industry. I care about our members, and I want our members to be very, very healthy. So I want to move this bar at this midpoint at least over 1 or 2 bars this year. And so that's my goal of this, is to really help kind of draw more attention to the need for us to market better, but also to recruit and retain people better. Another side topic here is the enrollment management could definitely be improved at a lot of our institutions. I fill out forms almost every day and see what comes back, and we can do a better job in terms of communicating to our adult learners. So these are all things that I want to see us improve. So I've said a lot. I've said my story, and I'll calm down. I'll drink less coffee, and I'll pass the baton over to Bruce to kind of tell you a little bit more about what's going on today.
Well, thank you, Jim. And I think all of that context is really important when we're thinking about cost per inquiry, right? Because what we're trying to do is add another metric that can help inform our decision making. And we know that metrics drive decisions, particularly when it comes to marketing. If we can go to the next slide, thank you. So what we have on the screen here is the average annual marketing budget as a percent of unit revenue by year since 2014. Every 2 to 3 years, UPCEA does a marketing study to try to get a better sense of where we are as an industry in terms of how are we evaluating and how are we resourcing our marketing departments. And so what we can see here is we had a pretty consistent and steady downward trend from 2014 to 2020. And then I don't know if you all are aware, but there was a pandemic. And when that occurred, everybody scrambled and started to throw a bunch of dollars at marketing. So we saw this jump up to 8.8%. And so with all this influx of cash, we're wondering, well, where do we spend it and how are we spending it? Go to the next slide, please. So if we look at the budget, marketing budget allocation, there's a couple of pieces that jump out to you. So first, to me, 25% a quarter is going to our marketing staff salaries. That makes sense. We need to hire and retain the best people possible. So a large portion of the budget going there makes complete sense. On the other hand, another 20% is going to outsourced or agency services. So if we don't have the team to do it, but we still want to make sure we get these critical tasks done, we're going to outsource it. But by far the biggest piece of the pie there is the media expenses, right? So that includes everything under the sun, from our digital spends to our SEO to our billboard buys, right? But it leads to the question: is our spending efficient or even effective? And the question is, well, how do you know? How do we know which effort was more effective? Was it that email campaign? Was it that campaign on Instagram? Was it that billboard? Without cost per inquiry, it's kind of hard to track some of those things. We don't know what's the most effective or where it's coming from. And that leads to Allison to talk a little bit more about cost per inquiry. And I will get into some nuggets of data down the road in terms of preliminary results as well.
Awesome, thanks, Bruce. Yeah, it brings us to looking deeper at how effective our marketing campaigns are. So in search influence, Paula talked a little bit about our experience, but it really starts for us with measuring, reporting on, and improving cost per inquiry, or CPI, as we'll probably refer to it, throughout the rest of the talk today. And we really believe in Peter Drucker's idea that what gets measured gets managed. And we'll show you an example of that in a little bit. But cost per inquiry, we'll talk a little bit about what it is and some of the different ways to measure and track it. So in my experience, I see two common ways that CPI is often tracked. So one is by digital marketing campaigns, or channels rather. So that might be looking at your cost per inquiry that's driven by paid search, or the cost per inquiry from organic. So you might consider a given channel more or less effective based on the cost per inquiry that it's earning for you. Another common way to track CPI is to look at it based on your total digital marketing spend across all platforms, and understanding that some of those digital channels might assist the other in getting that ultimate conversion. And so looking at that holistically to see what is our overall CPI. We also see some schools look at CPI by program. So maybe there's a specific educational program that they want to understand their costs on, or for example, organic. So that might be leads from organic search visitors on your website compared to how much you actually spend on SEO, like Jim was just talking about. And you might be surprised that these people are spending very little on SEO, but getting a lot of their inquiries through that channel. Or last, it might be looking at an overall CPI across all marketing expenses. And there's a lot of different ways to slice it, but we expect and know that this is going to vary from one institution to the next based on the marketing mix that they're using and their tracking capabilities as well. So however you calculate it, cost per inquiry really is the most important metric to know if your marketing campaigns are efficient. Meaning, are they driving as much as they can? Is your spend giving you as much as it can in terms of new prospects learning about or inquiring about your institution? So as we said before, once you know your CPI, once you start to measure something, you can begin to manage it or optimize toward more efficient campaigns. So the next thing I'm going to show you is an example for one of our clients. I'll explain a little bit about this data since I know there's a lot on the slide here, but we've been tracking the monthly cost per inquiry for this client for roughly 5 years or so. And really what we're looking at is all of their digital media spend here. So this slide is looking at 13-month period. It includes the 2022 to 2023 fiscal year. And just to orient you briefly with what you see on the slide, the line is illustrating the monthly cost per inquiry, again, across all of those digital advertising channels. And that's kind of tied to the right vertical axis there. Whereas the bars are tracking the monthly volume of inquiries, and the green is from paid digital advertising. We're also looking at things like the organic channel bringing in, how many inquiries is it bringing in, and so forth. So although we're still lacking this trusted sort of industry benchmark related to CPI, the fact that we simply have been tracking it for this specific client and looking at how it's affected over time, we've been able to make it a focus for optimizations, and in doing that, it's enabled us to optimize it down. So we're paying less, about half as much as we were a year ago for an inquiry. So that what that means is it's resulted in 2 times as many inquiries for a very similar marketing budget. So although we don't necessarily know how that compares to other institutions, the one thing we know for sure is that we're making an efficient use of the budget that we do have. So, together with the client, we keep a pulse on this data every month, and it helps to give us confidence, or even just to give us understanding as things fluctuate, because as you'll see, there's some jump ups and some jumps down over time. And it also serves as this jumping off point for us to look deeper at metrics. So in particular, we might go look at the lead quality driven by these channels, or the conversion ratios as these leads are moving through the enrollment funnel. One other quick word of caution, we're talking a lot about how to optimize down your cost per inquiry, but something to know, again, another compelling reason to measure it is that if your cost per inquiry is too low, that might be a red flag that your lead quality isn't good. So sometimes we'll see if we see a big decrease in our cost per inquiry, we're getting curious about whether we got good quality leads with that budget. So sometimes paying more for an inquiry might be necessary to get the truly qualified prospect that you're looking for. So if we had a trusted CPI benchmark, this is kind of the dream, we could have confidence that we're driving an appropriate amount of inquiries and yielding the desired results for the budget that we have. If we had a trusted CPI benchmark, we could evaluate our outcomes against broader industry standards. That's something we've really wanted for a while, at least for our clients. We could project our marketing results a little bit better and understand how quickly we can generate the necessary inquiries for a program to get to profitability, or for a program to be, proved as viable for you. And if we had that trusted CPI benchmark, we could judge if our promises, or promises from third-party vendors or agencies or whatever, are actually realistic. So knowing your own current CPI is kind of the first step in the right direction. But all of this, the kind of this dream that we're visualizing, is challenging without understanding how your own CPI stacks up against peer institutions. And that's exactly where this study is really coming from.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, that's right. So through this UPCEA research study, we're really embarking on a project to establish a trusted PCO industry benchmark for cost per inquiry primarily, but also cost per enrolled student. And this is really the primary goal of the study. We also, as a secondary goal, hope to encourage more universities to begin to measure CPI, and for everybody, whether you're tracking it now or you're beginning to track it, to be really cognizant about what you're including in those benchmarks. What costs are you taking into that calculation? And so, kind of talking about the fact that there is no industry benchmark out there. There are very minimal published benchmarks for CPI generally, but there are definitely none specific to professional continuing and online education. As Allison alluded to, we've been in this industry for many years, and time again, both we and our clients are looking for that trusted industry benchmark, thinking like, this must be out there. There must be a good one out there. We went on a deep search. Allison led the search personally, and we could not find, the number that we were ultimately looking for. So thus far, we've been leveraging various CPIs quoted from different channels to set our benchmarks, but we've really always wanted the solid data, and we knew if we wanted this, that our UPCEA members, UPCEA member organizations would as well. which is a perfect segue to some data that Bruce is going to share with us.
Yeah, so the drum roll, this is the exciting part, right? This is why we do the surveys, is so you can have these sorts of numbers. And let me emphasize very, very heavily, these are preliminary data points. We launched the survey a week ago, so these could fluctuate pretty considerably between now and when we close the survey itself. But nonetheless, I think they're interesting indicators. So overall, of the folks who participated so far, 46%, only 46%, are tracking cost per inquiry. And within that, we're seeing a relatively wide range between $44 up to $111. Anecdotally, I've heard much higher. So maybe that's just the folks who are wanting to show off are participating in the survey, but that's why we'd love to hear from everybody is this a realistic range or not? But probably one of the most interesting things to me, suggesting that even within that $44 to $111 range, only 1 in 3 are satisfied with their cost per inquiry. So again, this just keeps coming back to we need some sort of standard to understand, okay, on average, CPI is this, therefore I can or cannot be satisfied with our current efforts. So again, it's a really interesting start, but it's far from an end. And I guess that's a good segue back to you, Paula.
Yeah, and we timed this intentionally. One of the goals of this webinar really is to get more participation in the survey, because we understand it is a time commitment to provide this level of data and detail in a survey. But ultimately, we're doing this for you so that you can better understand, how you should measure cost per inquiry, as well as be able to compare to your existing cost per inquiry to these industry benchmarks. And with that, I really want to say that this year's study is a starting point. We don't expect that everybody is going to have all of the data being requested in the survey at this point, but we hope that you'll provide what you do have available. It's structured in a way that you can give us only the information that you have available. And so even if it's just a couple of data points, we really hope that you'll submit it so that we can grow the statistical significance of as many of these things as possible. Our long-term goal is really to create a shift among PCO marketers to look at these costs in the same way, so that as we move forward, we'll have even better benchmarks. So if we can share, how schools are measuring it today, encourage more marketing teams to track it, then in 2 years, that's even more people that can respond to the survey when ideally UPCEA runs this again. And so when the study's complete, this is the data that we hope to share with you. Number one, of course, this benchmark that we keep talking about. So you can see how your results compare to the wider industry. Ultimately, this is so that you can make more impactful updates to your campaigns and to your strategies. So the comparison is either going to give you the confidence to know that your campaigns are performing well, or they're going to give you the confidence to know that you need to push for improvements to those campaigns. The second is to understand what costs are included in the calculation, so that if you're comparing apples to apples, and you should consider if you should be looking at it differently. Maybe you're looking at it one way today, and you decide you want to start tracking a variant of that calculation and kind of monitor it over time and see how those compare. The third is that the study is also going to share with you the most popular marketing campaigns if they're managed in and out of house, so that you can see if there's a piece of the puzzle that you're missing, or maybe think about the way that you're currently managing your marketing campaigns. And then the fourth is showcasing other PCO units' satisfaction with these key metrics and their marketing overall. And very interestingly, of course, we're going to be looking at any correlation between these aspects. So is there more satisfaction with somebody who runs their campaigns in-house versus out-of-house? How does a certain CPI range correlate with somebody's happiness about their marketing or their satisfaction with their marketing results? So really interesting to see some of the correlations that Bruce and the team are able to draw there. And so as with all benchmarks, it can be a little tricky to, as I said before, compare apples to apples. And we're really looking to solve for that in the creation of this industry standard. So we're going to be really clear about what items are actually included in the benchmark. And so the first thing you might ask yourself when you're looking at any published benchmark is going to be is this relevant to me? And so one of the big things for this specifically is what other universities are included in this. So what kinds of schools are included, what departments, who's their target audience, what kind of marketing are they doing, how aggressive is their strategy. And so given that this is an UPCEA member survey, the expectation that you can have from this is that it is going to be schools similar to yours. They are going to be people who are also targeting the adult learner. They're going to have similar marketing strategies to you, very likely. And so therefore, it's going to be a fair comparison and something that's really useful for you. And the second major factor that's going to make this benchmark more meaningful is understanding those costs that are included. So this can make a big difference. I mean, this could be a swing of like 25% easily, maybe even greater, depending on how, what you're including and what somebody else is including. So all the different things that somebody might potentially include in their cost per inquiry, we've got listed on the screen here. I'm going to talk through them. So the first way that one might look at cost per inquiry is based just on media spend. And so we think this is a pretty good, fair comparison for both people who are running their campaigns in-house and those who have agency-run campaigns, because it takes, all of the agency fees essentially out of the equation and gives you that apples-to-apples comparison. The second most common way would be including both the media spend and any agency fees. And so this is how a CPI might be presented by an agency or by a media vendor, depending on the fee structure. And so this might be the only information that you have. And so when you respond to the survey, we're going to ask you for the CPI. We're going to ask you what's included. And so that way, if you aren't able to break it down to just media spend, we'll know that that one CPI data point also includes those agency fees. The third is by looking at all marketing expenses, and we do expect this to be less common, but we think that some people might see this as a fair way to view it if they have a really diverse marketing mix and when your leads can't be as easily attributed to a single source. Of course, all marketing pieces are ultimately going to drive someone, but usually we're looking at like a last click attribution. And then finally, we see potential that some people might look at CPI across both marketing expenses and salaries. So this is an option in our survey, but we do expect this to ultimately be rare for all of the reasons that I said before. And our hope is that with enough responses, we're going to be able to produce a CPI broken down in different ways. So maybe we can even note a variance and say in-house run campaigns and agency run campaigns, but it all depends on the amount of data we have and how many people fit into those sample sizes of what we're able to do with it. And this is really why we're putting so much emphasis on promoting the survey itself, so that we can collect this strong data, so that we have a sufficiency of responses, so that we can ultimately support you with dynamic benchmarks that are really going to help you understand how your marketing is doing today.
And so if you're not currently tracking or reporting on your cost per inquiry, how could you get it? What numbers would you need to know? I mean, I do want to make a quick point, which is that even if you don't already look at this metric now, we're going to go through some of the data sources that you might need, and you might have access to those, and you could still respond to the survey, even if it's not something you've historically tracked. So next, we're going to look at a couple ways you could get started. So the foundational calculations for how to calculate the cost per inquiry are actually pretty simple in terms of the math is simple. The first, I have two on the slide in terms of the two starting points that we'd recommend. So Paula went through a few different ones, but most common we expect to be digital advertising media spend divided by the number of inquiries that you can attribute to digital advertising. Again, the kind of the nuance here is that it will depend on how sophisticated your tracking is. If you aren't able to know, exactly which channels, marketing channels brought in those inquiries, then that's going to be a little more difficult for you to do in that way. And so if that is a challenge for you, you can tackle the second one, which is to look at just your overall marketing expenses and then divide by your total inquiries in the same time period from all sources to get an overall cost per inquiry. So again, the survey is going to ask for your CPI and then what you chose to include within it, and then it'll ask you for those data points so that we can even do the math if we need to break things down and come up with those apples to apples comparisons. So we're really looking forward to learning how institutions are currently looking at CPI. Of course, we have some inferences about what we think everyone's doing, but this survey will really illuminate the real picture for us. So if you're going to prepare to calculate this or preparing to submit the survey, I know I find this really helpful when I sit down to work on one of these surveys. You might start with kind of a blank screen. You don't know what you need in front of you to get going. So we hope this will help with that. You'll want to gather some key information that you can have accessible. So you'll want to first start by defining a date range for what you're looking at calculating your CPI for. The survey in particular is asking for your information for the 2022 to 2023 fiscal year. So you'll want to use that as your time anchor. And then you'll want to gather the information. So some likely sources are marketing reports, whether you have agencies or a marketing team that's producing a report, you'll want to pull that up to understand volume of inquiries. You might have campaign platforms. So if you're running ads in Google or Facebook and you have the conversion tracking set up there, you could set your date range and identify how many inquiries or conversions were tracked for each of those. Google Analytics is a key way that we measure conversions for our clients, and so that's another platform you might want to have accessible. Of course, your agency contacts or contracts, what did they commit to, and what was the spends that you expected to spend in that time. And finally, we encourage you to leverage your team, enlist their help. These kinds of things can devolve into a little bit of a deep dive, and so we know how that goes. So enlist the help of your team, even your agency contacts. We get asked often for certain metrics for our clients so that they can better understand things and better understand ROI, and we're happy to do it. So even if you don't have that CPI or the cost per enrolled student today, the survey will guide you to submit the relevant information that you do have available. And I think the team has made the case for you about how important and useful that will be going forward.
So here is the link to the official survey, as well as a preview link so that you can see the questions before you begin filling out, in case you want to send this out to your team to elicit their help. And so if you have any questions about the survey, you can reach out to Bruce. His email is super easy to remember, better@upcea.edu, which I just think is so perfect because research makes us all better. Thank you, Bruce. So reach out to him if you have any questions about the survey. And then totally separate from the survey, we at Search Influence have prepared a comprehensive worksheet that will help you calculate and track your CPI. So either for you to calculate your CPI today to input, or if you want to use it later as a tool to calculate and track your CPI over time. It is in Google Sheets, and this link will send you directly to make a personal copy of the spreadsheet. So if you have any questions about the worksheet, you can contact me, pfrench@searchinfluence.com. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bruce for Q&A. And so stick around till right after, when we'll announce the winner of our $200 gift card and the CPI analysis from our team.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paula. And thank you everyone again for being here. I know there's one question so far from Krista asking if we've collected data points for the entire funnel. And the answer to that is yes, Krista, but not in this particular study. We're actually going to be revealing some of those metrics at our MEMS conference. It takes place at the end of November. It'll be in Portland, Oregon this year. But yes, we are tracking the enrollment funnel as a whole, because I think all of this plays together, right? The cost per inquiry is great for getting folks in the door, but how do we convert after that? But I think this is a really good first step. So my question for the team here with Jim, Paul, and Allison is, we've talked a little bit about the challenges and the potential hurdles around generating cost per inquiry, but how do we mitigate those? Or maybe another way to ask it is kind of, what's the first step to trying to calculate that and really use that data?
I think it starts with relationships and systems first. I mean, we all have CRM systems, and we all have finance, and we know how much we're spending. And a lot of reasons why these numbers aren't reported is because, if you're a senior leader at the institution, do you know to ask that question? Is to say, hey, I want key performance indicators, I want metrics and whatever, and this is how it's going to happen or how it should happen. Are those relationships in place so we can gather information? I mean, information, it's usually there. It's just whether or not our systems are not being ignored, are being nurtured, are being the data is provided back and forth to people that are in decision-making places. And I think that's first and foremost because, 90% of our members or so more or less have some form of CRM system. And I would think that they're tracking it and they have connections to their digital marketing efforts and it's relational. If you're not going to ask for it, no one's going to give it to you. That's basically what Allison was saying regarding Peter Drucker, is that we've got to make sure that these exist.
Yeah, Jim, I think that's a great point. I just wanted to add one quick thing, which is that it also starts, you were just hitting on it, which is the tracking, right? So some of these CRMs, in my experience, I've seen the CRMs have the capabilities to track things like the source of that inquiry. So, what marketing channel brought in that inquiry, but they're not always in use. And so that is one of the most important things. If you're not familiar with how to do that, go to within your university system, if there's admin support related to your CRM system. So for example, some schools, whether it's Slate, they might have a person kind of in undergraduate admissions or admissions overall that might help with that type of thing. Ask those questions. How can we make sure the CRM is able to track the marketing channel that brought in that inquiry? And that's really going to help you down the line understand which channels are bringing in those inquiries. And then ultimately you can start to get more granular with your CPIs. So you would be able to understand, maybe from Google paid search, we're getting this, and from some other marketing channel, we're getting that. So I'm glad you touched on that. And, I do want to empower people to start looking at those CRMs and what those tracking capabilities are.
Yeah, and let me tag on to that just real quickly, Allison. And yeah, my dog's really cute there. I know that. But one of the things that I see at institutions here is that it isn't just a technology solution too as well. You got to have a marketer and a technology, and you got to make it real work here. And I've seen that the institutions that suffer the most tend to put their IT people onto it and not connecting them to marketers. And I think that's an important element too.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. That CRM champion does a lot of different things. I understand we have a question from Denise. Is it possible for us to have her ask, or does that work?
I don't think we can have her ask it live, but Denise, if you want to put your question in the chat, it looks like your hand is raised. And so if you put it either in the chat or the questions box, we'll be able to get it.
But in the meantime, and there was another question from Krista about when do we anticipate the results being published? I would anticipate the results are going to be published early next year. We're hoping to have a significant sample size that there is enough significance to draw from. So we started the survey last week. We're going to continue it open through UPCEA's MEMS conference. We're going to try to use that to help promote participation there as well. And then again, ideally, we will close it before the end of the year and then have those results early next year. I don't have a hard and fast date for you, Krista, unfortunately, but as we start to get further along, we'll have some of that fleshed out. Were we able to get Denise's question yet? Or maybe it was just a hand raise. That's okay. All right, just all good. One of the other questions I have for the panel then is, Allison, or I believe it was you, or maybe it was Paula, showed data around a by month cost per inquiry. Is that a typical cadence? Is that kind of the general timeline we should be looking at this, or is longer lens, maybe once a quarter, or should it be even more granular than that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yes, for that client, I think you're referring to kind of that bar with the line overlay chart that I showed. And yes, we were measuring it every month. And that's really because for that client, they have a pretty, I would say, aggressive digital advertising strategy where their ads are running persistently throughout the year. Even though there's some, seasonality related to enrollments, we have found that it works best if we're kind of persistently present in terms of reaching our audience through all those marketing channels. And so we had made that decision to measure the CPI monthly, helps us keep a pulse on that spend efficiency, if you will, and also understand the seasonality. But you're right, there could be other ways to look at it. For example, sometimes we take a step back and we say, for like what we're asking for in the survey, which is over the whole fiscal year, right? So we'll say over this fiscal year, we spent X and we got Y inquiries, and we want to understand what that cost per inquiry is over that whole time frame. And that's important because we also know that people might inquire today, but may not necessarily enroll in the same or like the most immediate upcoming term or course available. So we want to understand the cost per inquiry of the spend we have now, knowing that that might fuel funnels, into the future. So it's a great question. There are a lot of different ways to look at it. I would say that, when you're running campaigns persistently, you probably want to keep a tighter pulse on it on shorter time frames like monthly. And then you also want to be able to take a step back and look at something over a broader time frame like a fiscal year. It makes a lot of sense to do both.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing then is it essentially depends on your goals, right? If it's something that's happening frequently, it makes sense to measure it frequently. We've talked a lot about cost per inquiry, and I want to shift a little bit to the other kind of metric that we're very interested in with this study, which is cost per enrolled student. And so, marketing only gets that so far, but I'm curious if you guys could just talk a little bit about what you see as the relationship between cost per inquiry and cost per enrollment, and maybe, I don't know, Allison or Paula, if you can give an example about maybe one of your clients where, you were able to track that and say, okay, when cost per inquiry went down, cost per enrollment went down, or maybe the opposite was true. I find that hard to imagine, but nonetheless, I'll serve that question up to you all.
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't always, unfortunately, have the insight into the cost per enrollment because, like I said, it can be kind of complicated, especially in the PCO world. You're talking about adult students and they might take a long time to make that decision to go back to school, especially if it's something for like a master's degree. But, we have seen that, obviously kind of what you would expect, which is that when cost per inquiry is optimized down, your cost per enrollment is also going to be optimized down. And that's ultimately what, most of us really care about, is filling the seats with an efficient use of your marketing spend. But you make a great point, which is, obviously we are pretty focused on the marketing side and have to work in collaboration as much as we can with admissions, but to some extent, it's like marketing's job is to lead the horse to water, right? So we often are really focused on that CPI for that reason, because it's the marketing KPI, whereas that cost per enrollment kind of becomes the blend. It's like the marketing plus that admissions KPI for, how did we move them through? So I'm not sure I'm giving you a great like detailed answer to your question, but we have definitely seen as we optimize that CPI down, that long term, that cost per enrollment is also optimized, because of course you're spending less to get those inquiries and to fuel the funnel in the pipeline.
Yeah, and it speaks to the importance too of that enrollment funnel, right? If our cost per inquiries are quite low, but our cost per enrollment stays high, maybe something is going on within that enrollment funnel that's preventing us from seeing those efficiencies. One other question we had from the audience is that one individual struggled with tracking point in time spend against current inquiries versus what their OPM tries, which is to track spend from 6 months ago to inquiries today. So is there a best practice or two that you can share as it relates to that?
That is interesting. I think that I'm not sure exactly spend from 6 months ago to inquiries today. So spend from 6 months ago fueling potential enrollments for today might make more sense to me. But inquiries usually happen kind of in the moment. So the marketing is usually facilitating that action if it's conversion optimized, which what we would recommend and what we would say is best practice. The marketing spend, so for example, Google paid search, or if you're running Facebook ads or whatever it may be, usually is working now to get an inquiry into the pipeline now. And we know then that enrollment might still take some time because they have to move through starting an application and all of those things. But so it would make more sense to me to look at your current spend and the inquiries acquired in that same time period, as opposed to spreading, doing the math around spend from a while ago and inquiries from today. So I would match up those time frames. That would make a lot more sense to me. I don't know, Paula, if you have any insight or want to chime in on that, but that's kind of how I see it. Unless your OPM has some specific strategy that makes that more relevant.
Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
I was going to say we are just about up to time, so I want to be cognizant of that. We have one last final question. If someone could give and this is hard to give a brief answer to, but have you had any experience differentiating cost per inquiry versus cost per lead? So for example, the difference between a hand raised from a source and a deduplicated hand raised from an initial source in a given time frame.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Yes, I mean, both are possible, of course. You know, if you want to just look at if you want to call it leads, right? So conversion tracking maybe from your ad platforms. If let's say Facebook facilitates a conversion and that person fills out a form after clicking on your Facebook ad, but that same person also fills out a form or calls or something after they have interacted with a Google ad. That might show up as two different conversions, and therefore if you looked at that level of a cost per inquiry, it might look lower. Whereas if you went, like you're saying, a little bit farther down the line and you dedupe and you realize, okay, well, that's one lead, they maybe were assisted by a couple of different channels, then yes, you're looking at maybe like a more qualified, your cost per inquiry is certainly going to look a little bit higher there. We would recommend and prefer to do kind of the deduplicated version. So when we do cost per inquiry analyses with our clients, we're basing that off of the actual inquiries from the CRM platform as opposed to the conversions reported by the advertising channels, because they are going to be different. Again, because of that idea that you might have some duplication there. Another thing you can do is if you're able to do lead quality tracking in your CRM system, is you could look at your CPIs based on that. So maybe based on your truly qualified prospects or the ones maybe who weren't as qualified, you might decide that you want those in or out of your CPI. Either way, you know, is certainly possible. It all depends on how you want to slice it.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. It's about getting it done. It might be the more challenge. So I'll pass it over to Paula. I know we're a little over a minute here.
All right. Yeah. Thanks everybody for your patience. And we really love the questions. So thanks everybody for sending those in. So we will be sending out the webinar recording and a follow-up email. So everybody will get that. But before we wrap up, I want to announce a winner of our $200 and the professional CPI analysis from our team is Diana Ebanks. So congrats, Diana. And thanks everybody for attending today. And we'll be following up with this and some other resources via email. And Diana, I'll be emailing you as well.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, y'all. Have a great day.